the structure of the event is that it has been divided into 3 segments. To start with, we'll have practices. So current practices in the industry, from manufacturing to retail to consumer practices. And we'll have Mahenaz and Nawshin, who I call Hema Appa, as she's like an elder sister to me. So if you don't get confused, who is she talking about? And then for challenges, we'll have Omar talking and Delia. And then for the solution segment, we'll have Kat and Shauntelle. I just wanted to give a little bit of an intro as to why I thought of this event. I think it came from a place of questions that I myself have towards the industry, towards our society, about the way our clothes are made, about the kinds of clothes we wear. I think about this stuff quite often. I wear clothes every day, so I think about where they come from and where they will go once I'm done with them. And I think, and I'm hoping that everyone who's joined today also has similar questions. So yeah, that's kind of the inspiration for the event. And we have quite a few speakers from Bangladesh, which is because that's where I'm from. But also they're very well positioned to speak about this because Bangladesh is the 2nd largest producer of ready-made garments in the world. And so I think a lot of our examples will be about Bangladesh, but I think Bangladesh is a good kind of microcosm of a developing country that has, low skilled workforce and very like one-track exports, and a rising middle class and growing disposable incomes, and like lax environmental regulations and such. So I think, yeah, of course, that's not the only example, but I think it's a good place to start. So without further ado, I would love for our speakers to introduce themselves. And if I just call on each person one by one, if you just say your name, what you do, and maybe your, just in one line, your thoughts, your relationship with fast fashion. So Mahenaz, can we start with you?
Thank you, Juneyna. Thank you for having me in this amazing panel discussion. So I am Mahenaz Chowdhury. I am the sustainability scientist and artist at Broqué, which is an upcycling streetwear label in Bangladesh, the first of its kind. And I do gender neutral clothing aesthetics mostly. And my relationship with fast fashion is very bitter. Like I'm trying to change that philosophy and like create a community that believes in slow fashion, and hopefully we can do that together. Thank you.
I am on mute, sorry. Thank you for that. Hemapa, if you'd like to go, please.
Hi, my name is Nawshin Khair. I'm the managing director and the creative director of Aranya. It's a fair trade brand. We've been in business for 30 years. We work with natural dye and the heritage crafts of Bangladesh. My relationship with fast fashion, apart from sometimes going into Zara and H&M, I don't have a relationship with it. I represent, my commitment is more towards the slow fashion. Yes.
Thank you so much. And I'd just like to say, if anyone ever goes to Bangladesh, please go to the Aranya store because it is just beautiful. It's what all clothing should be. Can we please hear from Omar?
Hello, everyone. I'm Omar. Basically, I'm the vice president of Aranya and Dyeing. And when we talk about fast fashion, we think about sustainable growth in Bangladesh because the textiles industry in Bangladesh is at a crossroads now. basically we have the Sustainable Development Goals introduced by the government, and in line with it, all manufacturers are required to pursue sustainable growth. But we have major challenges in front of us, which is what we're talking about today, hopefully.
Okay, thank you so much. Um, we would like to hear from Delia now, please.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Delia Crowe. I am the program leader for MA Fashion Design at Winchester School of Art, which is the University of Southampton. Instigated and run a sustainability forum, which was every year until a little hiccup last year. And my relationship with fast fashion, I can't really probably say in one sentence, but I do have a 13-year-old daughter who is about to have a much bigger relationship with fast fashion. So I think that's going to concentrate my mind.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Kat, will you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, I'll apologise in advance if my dog starts barking. It's that time of night. It's nice to see everybody tonight. My name's Kat Duffy. I'm a lecturer in marketing at the Adam Smith Business School at the University of Glasgow. And I'm a consumer culture researcher, so I'm really interested in how people make sense of their clothing behaviours, and specifically in terms of how they make sense and align it with their sustainability values. When it comes to fast fashion, I think we have a really dysfunctional relationship with the fashion system, especially in the UK. And I think my work is definitely focused on thinking about innovations and how we can support consumers in terms of their behaviours. So that's something I'm looking forward to chatting about later on.
Juneyna,
Awesome, thank you.
I forgot to mention, I'm the country coordinator of Fashion Revolution. Did I mention that?
Yes,
Sorry,
you are.
I think the 1M thing just kicking in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you are the country coordinator for Bangladesh for Fashion Revolution, which is a very important thing to mention. Yes. And lastly, but not leastly, can we have Shauntelle?
Hi, yeah, I'm Shauntelle Islam. I don't have so much a professional title, other than just a strong passion out of learning about fast fashion from my course. I'm an international relations student, and my relation to fast fashion ties in with my identity crisis of being half Bangladeshi and then learning about fast fashion and how it comes about alongside my personal behaviors towards fashion at the time. And I just kind of, what I do is be as active as I can about it. I try and create a space where people can have discussions about things that maybe they didn't think there was space to have discussion for, much like Kat trying to sort of track down the history of how this behavior towards fast fashion has come about, and seeing how people rationalize their decisions towards fast fashion, and about trying to make small changes so it turns into like a bigger attitude towards life in general. So yeah, that's my standpoint on it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for your introductions, everybody. It was really great. So we'll move on to questions now. And just for everybody, all the audience members who just joined, the first 1 hour and 10 minutes or so will be questions kind of between me and each speaker. Other speakers are welcome to add points or interject when fellow speakers are talking, but I would request if audience members can hold their questions till the last segment, if that's okay. If you have a burning question, then pop it in the chat and we'll try and get to it. So starting with the first segment, which is practices, current practices in the industry. I'm going to start with Mahenaz. Yeah.
Sure.
Can you hear me, Mahenaz? Yeah.
Loud and
Okay,
clear.
cool. Okay. So Mahenaz, I just wanted to, so you started a upcycling business where you use clothes that have been made by the fast fashion industry and you turn them into something else, which you call slow fashion. So this business that you started required a lot of research on your part. So I feel you're in a very good position to give us a kind of lowdown to start off. That what are the current ways in which fashion is currently produced in the world, that and the way that it's consumed and disposed of that needs changing.
Cool. I was just like writing down notes while we were like having the discussion. So I think one of the biggest eye-opening for me was that like in terms of like production, right? Like globally, there's very little accountability towards like how much is actually demanded for. There is this vicious cycle of like constantly producing like their brands, like, you know, coming up with like multiple collections throughout the years, which kind of like gives people the urge, kind of pushes the consumers to like believe that they need to buy and be up with the trends that these brands are producing, right? So it's not just the brands, but also like the entire entertainment industry is also involved in like shaping how the consumer trends kind of like go about it. So I feel in terms of production, like the mass production is one of the most it's a very harmful production process because we are producing more than we actually need. And for that, what happens in the background is that when you start thinking about it from in terms of like even like the yarn production, which goes back to the agricultural production of like materials and fabrics, like there's so much pollution being done just in that front, right? I mean, if you just think about it, like one t-shirt, for example, like uses up about like 2,700 liters of like fresh, like drinking water in the entire process of making one t-shirt. And in Bangladesh, you can get a t-shirt for less than $1. So imagine how that shapes consumers' mindset in terms of consumption, that they have very little empathy towards the clothes that they buy because it's so cheap and it's easily disposable and replaceable as well, without the idea of like how much damage or like what are the environmental impacts it's causing in the background. In terms of disposal, however, if we just think about like Bangladesh, I think Bangladesh has a very healthy culture of recycling or just like rotating clothes amongst our communities, because we don't have that much of landfill. But what happens is that in the production process, there's a lot of wastage happening because of the way that the garments are designed, right? So that happens at the back end. And that has a very healthy system of a secondhand market that gets regulated and like circulated for like different kinds of like businesses and stuff. So in a way, a lot of these things get used up, but that still doesn't justify the disposal, the unregulated disposal system done from the brands or from the factories, right? So that would be my like takeaway for you for like how the industry works from my point of view.
Awesome. So it's going to pick up on this word that you used, which was empathy, and like for consumers to have empathy towards the clothes that they're buying or that they're wearing. So as in your business, do you think that that is something that you strive for, and how do you go about creating empathy towards your clothes? Sorry.
That's like my biggest priority, to kind of like give people a backstory into like how these clothes are being made or how these garments are being made, so that people feel attached to it, which is why I went into upcycling. Because what happens in that process is that two things. One is that I'm collecting old clothes from the people that they want to customize into something else, so that they can kind of like elongate the memory of that clothes and have that in a different form, not just in what it was before. So you're constantly, you know, like upgrading that product, upgrading that particular item for themselves. So That way they feel more attached. The other thing that happens is that when I'm collecting surpluses from garments industries and like factories and like small scales, um, the process of how it's being made, that it's not mass produced, rather it's done in a very small scale, which means that there's a lot of attention put behind into how the design is being made, how it's being produced, how it's being cut, and like every piece is used back into like making something else. So so my aim is to like create zero wastage and create empathy amongst consumers, that whatever you buy from my brand has very little wastage like given back into the streams. So I hopefully this will create some kind of a dialogue between people. The other thing that I try and do is that create a lot of advocacies, workshops, and awareness around slow fashion and upcycling, so that people can learn more about it and adopt these as like lifestyle changes instead of just depending on like broke products. So you're more focused on the academic and the awareness aspects of the entire sustainable fashion.
So we're so accustomed to buying cheap clothes now that if something costs more than a couple of dollars, then it seems too much, or we know we can get it elsewhere. So how do you change that mindset from a couple of generations of people who are now so used to a certain type, certain price point? How do you I guess you talked about like the academic side of it and doing your workshops, but in a sense, I feel that you can only reach a certain number of people with that. So how do you take that to a mass scale and like international?
That's a very good question, right? And this is something that I'm struggling with myself as well. Like this is a question for me as well to like figure out as we go along the way. But right now, like you've said, the idea is to figure out a way to kind of um, create awareness amongst the mass consumers and kind of be price competitive. Although it's very difficult, like when you're thinking about upcycling, you're literally stripping apart a garment, which takes a lot of time. The entire process, it's twice the more time consuming than it would have been originally, right? And the challenge is to kind of be like price competitive to the fast fashion brands and like everything that is available, not just locally but also because of like influx from like India or like China, like super cheap products, right? So I think it's about connecting with different streams of the value chain and creating like a stronger and a more transparent value chain system. Together you can create and together you can lower the prices a little bit so that it can be accessible to the mass, because fashion is nothing without the mass, is what I feel. That if it's not accessible to the mass community, then it's just it's very difficult to like sustain in the long run, right? And once you can bring that change amongst the mass consumers, that's when things will start, like that's when like the entire concept about like sustainable fashion will start being adopted by everybody. It's not going to be deemed as like, oh, it's just a very upscale, like a upper class kind of a thing, like because it has that kind of a stigma as well, because people feel that, oh, sustainable means that it's very like, high price and it's for a particular type of group. But I think that's where, like, if we can kind of bring in different parties of the entire fashion value chain to come together and kind of like figure out a way to make it more sustainable and affordable for the mass, that would be something very interesting. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your really great points on this. I'm going to move on to Hema now, aka Nawshin. And my first question to you is about, I suppose, your own identity and your position of being a part of Fashion Revolution, which is an organization, international organization set around the world trying to deal with all these issues and kind of being against fast fashion. But again, you're a citizen of Bangladesh, and you see the sheer economic benefit of fast fashion to, a country like ours. We've moved in the last couple of years from, a lower income country to a middle income country. We see women who are about 85% of the workforce of fast fashion factories having independence. So from that position of the conflict of interest, what do you think is how do you reconcile the two realities?
Thank you, Juneyna. Yes, it's so true. From the beginning, Fashion Revolution Bangladesh team had to be mindful of the Bangladeshi context, keeping in mind how fragile the sector was post Rana Plaza incident. While Fashion Revolution campaigns from the rest of the world was demanding fairer and transparent supply chain from the international brands, locally we had to kind of ease into a dialogue, more of a policy dialogue, highlight best practices within the industry, and tracking down good initiatives that were addressing all these issues around the problems specific to our country. We all came to know that some like most, I guess, most severe and exploitative working conditions and worse environmental damages happen deep within the fashion supply chain, right? And I guess because of that, initially when uh, we faced challenges when we were trying to establish a position with the local stakeholders. We we couldn't, they didn't want to really speak to us. They didn't want to have a dialogue with us. So we had to take a different approach. So I think in 2015, we partnered up with a local fashion university, Booft, and their students, and created a workshop between them and the manufacturers to understand the gaps in the industry. And then we had an exhibition to showcase conscious fashion. And there, I think we finally got the president of the BGMEA, it's a garment association of Bangladesh, to come and kind of have his guards down and start having a conversation with us. Now that I look back, before that, it was such a challenge. Like doors were being closed on us from the factory owners and the representatives of different, relevant organizations as well. But it's been 7 years since Rana Plaza, right? And we've seen many organizations like donor organizations, even different foreign countries, the European embassies stepped up, helping these factories to achieve, a better situation in terms of safety and social protection for the workers. And we started collaborating with them every year to highlight the progress that's been happening in Bangladesh. So it's just like we have to create this balance, from being an activist and also like ensuring that the best practices are happening to sustain this fashion ecosystem that we have in our country right now.
Absolutely. And so at Fashion Revolution now in Bangladesh, since Bangladesh has come a long way in developing its industry standards, it's now much better regulated. Bangladesh has, I think, the highest number of green factories in the world at great cost to the owners. As Omar mentioned, they're pursuing sustainable development goals. So a lot of progress has been made. So in light of that, at Fashion Revolution in Bangladesh, what is your current focus?
So every year, so we have a basic theme around Fashion Revolution every year. One is to amplify unheard voices, and the second is like community-wide engagement participation, right? When we say amplify unheard voices, we mean that we kind of take the producers, workers, and communities affected by the fashion industry, giving them a platform where they're being heard. And through community engagement means we're 90 different countries now. So we have several activations around advocating the effects of fast fashion, and kind of create a dialogue between trying to create a dialogue between consumers and the brands as well, asking them the right question: who made my clothes, who made my fibers? But we also have concepts, themes for each year. And this year we're this year, we're kind of calling on the fashion industry and the governments to recognize the interconnection between human rights and the rights of nature, because all this time we feel that these two were seen in a separate light, the human rights aspect and the environment aspect. We also believe that the human exploitation and the ecosystem degradation that we see all around us today are the product of centuries of colonialism and globalized exploitation, right? So this year, I guess, Fashion Revolution is going to partner up with 5 key organizations like World Fair Trade Organization, Tamil Nadu Alliance, Canopy, the Plastic Pollution Coalition, and we'll be campaigning forward with like the findings we have from these organizations, and yeah, we'll have our activities around that this year.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Very interesting. And people can be a part of that by, is there a Facebook page or an Instagram? How, if people wanted to join?
Absolutely. We have a website. All the assets are given. We have an FOS. We are going to highlight from Bangladesh. So we are working with 2 designers, Shama and Rahmur Ray, who are leading in the sustainability front. So they're working. One of them is working with Orno right now, and the other ones they just launched their Chawl and Shamakum initiatives. So they'll be curating their workshops and shows. So if you go to the website, you'll find out more about how you can get involved and what you can do to help with this revolution. Yeah.
Perfect. So the last question to you is about harking back to an era where Bangladesh or Bengal was famous for its luxury textiles. The muslins, the Dhaka gauze, the jamdanis are, in all the history books, are the most coveted textiles. But those have either don't exist anymore. I mean, the very weavers, we don't have the skills anymore for some of those things, or they've been hijacked by companies like Zara. You see folk embroidery from Mexico on like Zara tops, which are being sold for $20. So things like that. How from your perspective as the owner of a brand which deals in organic local textiles, how do you plan on kind of taking that and overcoming the fast fashion, or overtaking the fast fashion with local textiles?
Well, you're right, Juneyna. Bangladesh has such a rich history in woven textile, like you mentioned, muslin, jamdani. We also have this slow stitch called nokshi katha, similar to the embroideries in Mexico, perhaps. And then we also have the area of basketry, terracotta, pottery, so forth. And I've been working with slow fashion, the craft communities for the past 10 years, and Orno has been working for the past 30 years trying to develop a green value chain within this sector, right? So the main challenge, I would say that the craft sector is kind of working as an informal sector where these communities work in small enterprises without trade license. They don't pay tax, Therefore, they also don't have any social or market protection, right? So organizations like us, when we work, work towards developing, empowering these women and trying to give them better livelihood. There are initiatives like nonprofits and initiatives like us, but to address the needs of these communities, to formalize them so they can reap more benefits from the government. We will need kind of help from formalized sectors such as the garment manufacture sector. So this is something I think inevitable. Like Bangladesh is now making basic products like t-shirts and so the profit margin is lower. As soon as Bangladesh, the manufacturers kind of work with these craft initiatives, it will be a value added product and differentiated product. So you will be able to get higher margin from the buyers. But this ecosystem, it's we have to really carefully plan an inclusive. We have to make an inclusive plan where these marginalized people are not again being extorted. And we also have to keep in mind that we can't deplete the resources that we have, and we have to be mindful of course the environmental impact if you were to like take these two sectors and work together. I hope I could answer the question.
No, definitely you did, and you made some very good points, which I will remember to ask Omar about, who is our next speaker. But before I move on to Omar, and thank you, Hemapa, for your very interesting points about Bangladesh's position. And I'd just like to mention that if you would like our speakers, if you would like to just write the brands that you're associated with or the organizations you're associated with in the chat, because that's been a request from the audience members. So yeah, they would like to follow your work. So that would be great. Thank you. Omar, moving on to you. Are you ready?
Yeah. Basically, I was following Mahenaz and what she was saying about when you asked her, so what is the solution here? What do we do? I think the main, the bridge that acts between consumers and manufacturers are the retailers. Basically, it's not necessary that the consumers have to pay more for the t-shirts, or consumers have to, the t-shirts have to be priced higher, because the retailers are already making a large amount of profit. The t-shirts they buy from us, it barely costs $1 or $2, and then they're taking it there, and then through brand value they sell it for $20 or even more. So it's up to the retailers. Actually, it is time for them to think, and they need to stop acting like colonialists basically at this day and age, where they basically exploit the third world, exploit the developing nations, because here manufacturers are squeezed to nothing. Basically, they operate on a 10% profit margin, and whatever they are left with, it becomes very difficult. Only the big manufacturers, like those who have the capacity and those who are large manufacturing companies, they can afford to implement technology innovation and efficient energy management techniques into their production system. But not all companies have the feasibility or the ability to do that. There are 5,000 factories in Bangladesh right now, and only 320 factories have registered for lead compliance, and only 80 have received certifications. And since Rana Plaza incident, 50% of the companies have been, factories, industries have been installing water treatment plants and other water recycling measures and other compliance. They have been following compliance regulations, but there's a large chunk still which are not able to implement these policies introduced by the government. So there's a problem there also, because, and the retailers need to start seeing the manufacturers as partners also. They have a corporate social responsibility. They need to start investing in R&D and in workshops like Nawshin who has come up with an initiative here. They need to provide us with funds also, because the manufacturers alone in this country do not have sufficient funds, or they have liquidity crisis. I'm not talking about the big ones, I'm talking about the SMEs who basically operate on working capital from the bank. So these retailers need to come up with policies to invest in R&D and workshops in our country. And we also don't have energy service companies, consultancy firms, which can make the garment owners, RMG owners aware about the benefits of efficient management of energy. For example, in dyeing, basically, they use 300 liters of water every single day. So that comes up to around almost 9,000 liters of water at the end of the month. And no one is basically paying heed to this, where they can easily reduce their water consumption by implementing new technologies. So yeah, there we expect much more responsibility from the retailers in this aspect. Also, there's a problem with working conditions in Bangladesh. Basically, that's a problem because of subcontracting, and that is a result of fast fashion as well. Basically, manufacturers have this attitude that they always take in orders more than their production capacity. So even the big manufacturers were compliant with regulations, who have all the environmental standards met, whatnot, but then they take these orders and then they subcontract it to other factories which do not meet compliance regulations. So effectively, the retailers might not also know at the end of the day that, working conditions are not being met fully. So for that, I think we need a proper social awareness program, and we need more workshops that needs to work closely with manufacturers and small, medium enterprises especially, not just the big corporations. Yeah, that's about it. Do you have any more questions?
So I was about to say that you're the best speaker I've ever had, because I didn't ask anything. You just answered all my questions. It was amazing. So I didn't need to do any work here. I have one question, a follow-up question, which is, I guess, around the pandemic, and this is something you mentioned, that like the retailers squeeze the manufacturers so much that they're kind of left out in the cold.
And also there's this another issue, basically. Sorry for interrupting. There's this another issue. There are compliance regulations for manufacturers, and there's Accord and Alliance and whatnot, but there are no regulations for buyers. There's no international body that basically dictates the purchasing practices of buyers. It is also important for buyers to act ethically whilst they're purchasing products. For example, during pandemic, many buyers have canceled billions of dollars worth orders in Bangladesh, or they have canceled it temporarily, and then they come back later and then they go like, you have to give it to us at this price, otherwise we're not going to take it. And then you're left with so much waste, and the workers are not being paid because you're not being paid properly, and the cost of production is not even being met by the buyers. So there's no body that basically dictates the attitude of the buyers throughout the world. So there should be an international body that also, sets regulations for buyers to set terms and conditions ethically when dealing with manufacturers. And like
I didn't even ask my question. How did you know? That was exactly the question I was going to ask. What's happening here? It's a bit spooky. I know we've been friends for a long time, but it's a bit weird. So yeah, exactly. I was going to ask what should we be doing to hold retailers to account? Should governments get involved? Should our government get involved? Should there be an international body? You answered that question.
I think I've always believed this since t-shirts and garments, it's a mass product. So in the RMG sector, there will always be perfect competition, and whether it's fast fashion or slow fashion, people will always wear clothes. So you can never stop short of selling clothes. So these developing nations, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam, all the developing nations who are responsible for manufacturing, they should come together instead of, yeah, the competition should be there, but it should be healthy. So they should come together and they should form an international body where they go like, this is the base price, we will not sell below this price, because we need to ensure our workers' rights, we need to ensure their safety, we need to ensure a minimum wage. I mean, still the minimum wage in Bangladesh is $100 for workers here. That is still not that much. That is still not up to the adequate level. But then if you, yeah, we have no option as manufacturers, because the retailers are not changing their attitude. And that, which is why we should, and we should also, and we are also responsible ourselves, because we compete with Vietnam, we compete with other nations, and then basically we're willing to compromise all the time. When we come together and we form a single body and everybody meets a middle ground, then retailers will not be able to hold us against each other as leverage, that you're not going to give it to me at this price, I'm going to go somewhere else, basically. So that will basically send a message to the retailers.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point. And I think that's how the EU actually functions on its products. You know, they support their manufacturers in that way, and they push for regulations. And they say you cannot buy anything from this entire block of countries if you do not meet XYZ regulation. Our issue is that in South Asia, we all hate each other. So,
Exactly.
you know, yeah, we have so many political issues. I don't know how we're ever going to form a EU type of bloc. But thank you so much for your really great points, Omar. Really eye-opening to hear kind of from the other side of the story. So we will be moving on now to Delia. And also my questions to Delia and also her field are slightly different. We're coming at it from an education angle, a fashion education, kind of what is the new generation learning? So my first question is, so the sustainability conversation in education, in academia, how is it currently taught? How do you teach sustainability to your students, and how responsive are they, and how integral is that conversation to fashion academia?
Okay, so, well, thank you for your question, and thank you to the speakers before, which were all brilliant. And I actually used to work as a designer, so I've been teaching for about 10 years, but I worked in the fashion industry for years and years. So a lot of what Omar was saying really resonated with me, actually, and the other speakers as well. So, and I completely agree with everything he said. But yeah, to get to education, I think it feels as if it's a fairly new field. It shouldn't be, but it feels as if it's quite new. And I think that, I mean, I teach MA level, and I think that one of the points of doing an MA is to kind of investigate your own work. It's to come and work with a university and to come with your own ideas, and then we work with you. So it's not quite the same as saying, okay, you must do this, you must do that, and you can't really teach MA like that. Although I do a sustainability project, which I probably started it about 5 or 6 years ago, and actually it's changed throughout the years, because you know, because I kind of reacted to the students, you know, reflected on how the students worked and what the outcomes of the projects were, and realized that it's quite difficult to set a sustainable project brief just straight off the bat. You almost have to do it and then see what the comeback is. And so it's partly it's about collaboration with the students as well, and it's about, I suppose it's almost about learning from them how to teach them, because it's, you know, I don't want to be just talking at the students. I don't want to be telling them what they have to do. I want them to sort of leave the university feeling that that's the right thing to do, because in my opinion, sustainability is, it's like everything. It's the biggest thing. Like you know, it's such a big issue. And in fact, when I talk about, you know, when I do my sustainability forum, one of my kind of openings is actually I would like to get to a point where I don't have to do a sustainability forum and we don't even need to talk about it, because I think that it should be such a natural part of life. I don't think we should even have to think about it. And I think there's lots of difficulties with talking about the consumer and making the consumer feel guilty and all the rest of it. And I think actually, I really agree with the previous speakers, which is that I think it's the corporations, it's governments, and I think this idea of people, well, of companies getting together and you know, kind of staying strong. And because I think that it's such a big issue. You know, and you have these big companies, these big fast fashion companies, these big corporations, lots of other corporations and companies as well, that are not held accountable by governments. And so I think there's such a systemic change that needs to happen, you know, from the top all the way down. And yeah, so it's a tricky one. And I think I mean, I've been looking at this issue, researching this issue for years, and you know, there's no one solution. It's not one size fits all, but I think it's about conversations like this and collaborations and actually communicating, because I think that the corporations have, it's in their interest to keep us apart, you know, to stop these conversations. It's in their interest to stop, you know, the big companies and the consumers. They don't really want them to know how the people in work in the factory, how they live, what their lives are. They want to keep them apart because it's in their interests. Because the more you know, and the more, I suppose someone mentioned empathy earlier as well, but you know, the more you know about how things work, the more transparent they are, maybe you can make different decisions about things. But you know, I do also agree with what Omar was saying, which is that we should sort of, you know, lots of people need to get together and say, okay, we're not going to sell this for less than something, or, you know, it needs to be so integrated into the system. And design, I know, is a really big part of that. And I know that they would say that design has an impact on maybe 80 or 90% of the product's sort of lifespan. But I think it's easy to forget that most designers work for a company, and you do what the company tells you. And, you know, again, going back to what Omar was saying, you know, if a company says, well, we need this product and we need it in 3 weeks, you haven't got, you know, you don't have 6 weeks to make it, you've got 3 weeks to make it, then, or we'll cancel. And, you know, there's all those things. And I think as a designer at a university, you know, when you're being taught, you're not really told those things. I think it's those things you learn in industry, I think. So I think, you know, sorry, I know I'm sort of rambling, but I think that coming from industry means that I can approach my students in a particular way, which I feel is quite important, because I can say, okay, I've been to factories in India, I've been to factories in China, this is what it's like, this is how it works, and this is how you can, you know, how you can rethink the way you work and rethink the system, and, you know, go out into the world as practitioners and activists, and, you know, you are going to change the world. You need to, you have to. So I kind of approach it like that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Sorry, I didn't catch that.
A long answer.
No, not at all. There's lots to say on the topic, so no such thing. And so you touched upon this idea of sustainability kind of being like a trendy thing now, that you take from your students, them wanting to know about it, learn about it. So do you think that comes from sustainability being like a buzzword, especially among young people, or do you think it's a genuine kind of care and concern for where we're going?
I think lots of younger people definitely care, definitely are interested in changing things, and I think that you can see that on social media, and obviously the way younger people sort of interact and communicate is so different. It's so different to when I was, that age. But I think it's so prevalent. And actually, I've got a 13-year-old daughter. She's at school. She will be taught these things as she comes up through the school, which obviously I didn't have when I was younger. But then when I was at school at 13, there wasn't any fast fashion. It didn't exist. So I almost hope that this age of fast fashion is something that's maybe temporary, because actually we've been talking about sustainability since, say the 70s, but before that it wasn't talked about, because everyone knew the value of things and the value of resources, because they understood, because they didn't have anything, and things have changed so quickly and so much. But I really hope that this idea of fast fashion is something that maybe from the 80s till now will start to slow down, and maybe we'll have a new phase of a type of fashion, something else that comes, like a different kind of economy, because obviously we need to keep the economy going, or a different kind of consumption. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and I'm very hopeful, but also we don't have a choice. Like we've got to do it. Like there's no choice. There is no choice. We whatever it takes, we have to deal with these issues. So
no, absolutely, we do, and we will. We're doing so now, hopefully.
Yeah.
So last question for you, and that is about high fashion, or high couture as such, which is luxury fashion, charge exorbitant prices, and you would hope that something that is costing so much would have sustainability and innovation at its core, because they have the option to explore those kinds of things. So a lot of your students will eventually go into that kind of world, because most fashion designers, in my opinion, aspire to be a part of the haute couture world. So do you think that is the case in high fashion, in luxury fashion, or do you think that they're also pursuing the same sort of goals as fast fashion, but just masking it with much better materials?
I think that's an interesting question, and this is just my opinion, but from my point of view, I would say that it doesn't matter which level of the market you're in, whether you're luxury, haute couture, or whether you're, right down at the bottom, cheap market, cheap and cheerful, or whatever. I think that some brands will be sustainable and responsible and will care, and some brands won't. And I don't think it matters if it's luxury or a cheaper, brand, because I think that my sort of background is more like high street, that kind of big high street brands, and they don't set out to be unsustainable. I mean, they you know, they have good intentions, although obviously they don't always work out. And I think that you have some high fashion brands, so Stella McCartney, and there are other brands who take the idea of responsibility and sustainability, they take it really seriously, they invest in it, they invest in the technology and research and development and all the rest of it. And I think there are probably some that don't at all, don't care. And actually, I think a lot of the time you're paying for the brand, because I know that, you know, some of the very well-known brands, they may make you know, garments in the same factory as more of a high street brand. You just pay more, and it isn't always that it's better quality either. So I think, and I think also that it's a small, you know, it's a much smaller market. So I think my background being sort of more high street is, I'm probably a bit more invested in thinking about the need to change that, because it is such a massive part of the market. You know, I think people spending £500 on a handbag is, you know, a very small percentage of what we're talking about. I think it's the mass market that feels like it really needs change to me.
No, absolutely. I guess I was just thinking that, like, people who do spend 5,000 or 500 or 5,000 pounds on a handbag, like, they would maybe expect that these same companies are also, you know, investing in sustainable practices. But as you said, they're probably not. Everybody is profit driven in this world. Thank you so much, Delia, for your comments and your responses. So moving to the third and last segment of today's session, which is the solutions to all the issues that we just discussed right now, all the current practices that we all think can no longer carry on as they are. Kat, can I call on you, please, for my next couple of questions? And I want to start off with something similar to what Delia mentioned about, like, not making the consumer feel guilty about their choices, or consumers making the right choice, not leaving it on consumers to make the right choice, to do their research. Brands should just from the get-go be doing what, you know, is right. So I was talking to Deirdre, who is a research colleague of yours, Kat, and she was mentioning something called the vote. As a consumer, we have a vote as to, you know, when we choose what we buy, we're voting with our choices, which companies do better, what practices carry on, what gets eliminated through, you know, the natural course of the market. So how much importance and how much focus should we put on the consumer to do the right thing?
I think it's a really good question. I think I would probably echo a lot of the sentiments that other speakers have talked about in terms of empathy and guilt. I think you can't avoid that the consumer has a really key role to play, especially when we think about wasteful clothing practices. But I think we have to be really careful in our framing not to overburden consumers who are presently definitely time poor or often cash poor. And I think in over responsibilizing consumers, we take agency and focus away from industry and the wider infrastructure that we've been talking about. So from design to purchase to use, care, disposal, consumers need to be supported in that idea of what is right in terms of their sustainability goals. And as you mentioned, I work closely with my colleague Deirdre, and our research has explored what consumers currently do with their clothing, but also what they would hope to do in terms of how can they take their sustainability values and think about changing their behaviours so that there's alignment between the two. And our research is mostly focused in a UK context. And as I said right at the start, the UK has a really dysfunctional relationship with the fashion system, where we buy more new clothes than anywhere else in Europe. And I think that represents both a challenge and an opportunity in terms of how we approach consumers to potentially start to shift some of those behaviours. from our research, we've definitely found that becoming a sustainable consumer is not an easy task, that people often almost exhibit paralysis, where they're given lots of information and have their awareness peaked, but there isn't really an easy path to action to be able to take that forward into meaningful behavior changes. And that's where I think we need to look at that systemic change rather than looking just at consumers. I think definitely in a UK context, we need to be looking towards policy, we need to be looking towards industry in terms of changes being made. I think in the UK context, we had seen some movement in 2019 with the UK government's environmental committee looking at fast fashion. Really disappointing that from the recommendations from that, such as a 1p charge to retailers that would help to support recycling, none of the recommendations that were put forward were actually taken forward and put into practice. So I think we have a long way to go in joining up those conversations between what consumers are doing, what they want to do, and how we can support that.
No, thank you. No, that's very true. And this behavioral change is something that we talk about again and again, and especially in your research, which is kind of centered around this digital wardrobe app. So the app, I'll let you explain what the app is, but it hopes that by connecting people with things that they already own, that will incite people to change their current behaviors towards clothes. So do you want to talk a bit about Save Your Wardrobe and your work with it?
Sure. So as you say, we've been working with Save Your Wardrobe for 3 and a bit years now. We met originally at Copenhagen Fascist Summit, where they were displaying as a kind of up and coming innovation. And to give everybody a bit of a mental image, if you've seen Clueless, which I know for some of the younger audience members, it might not resonate. But it's really thinking about how we can digitalize your wardrobe so that it makes it a more accessible space for you, but also through helping to reconnect consumers with the contents of their wardrobe. The app really helps to encourage people to buy less, buy better, and make more out of what they already own. So Save Your Wardrobe is an app that launched in March of last year, which actually I think turned out to be quite good for the company in terms of people had time to think about potentially wanting to digitalize their wardrobe, and could do some conscious reflection in terms of what they owned and what they were bringing into their house and into their own spaces. We found in our research, so we did market testing in terms of market readiness for the app with people that were looking to or were already engaging in some sort of behavior change, and were looking for a tool to really help support that. And we followed the app all the way through. So with consumers starting to digitalize their wardrobe and how they approach that, through to how they've used it and how it starts to shape their day-to-day behaviors. So one thing that we found which really struck me was that in comparison to other sectors where people can maybe make more sustainable interventions, like food, so food was something that came up quite commonly, was that people just really didn't understand their wardrobes. They couldn't really get a holistic 360-degree view on what they owned and how much they were using it. So the app gives people the opportunity to really think about reframing what they own. It gives them more knowledge of the brands that they own, but also how much in terms of capital investment they've got sitting in their wardrobe. And it also has a full ecosystem of services attached to it. So you can think about whether you want to donate or recycle or get an item mended, so that you can really start to think about that use value attached to your items and extracting the full capacity of that value. So it's coming up, I think, as of the start of next month, it will be a year since the app's launched, and it's doing really well. It's gained quite a lot of traction, and they're looking to, at some point, grow it geographically. At the moment, it's been quite London-centric, but they do have quite widespread users throughout the UK and into Europe at the moment.
Yeah, it's a really cool app. It's a really interesting way to look at, especially from the capital investment point of view. You just realize how much money you spend on your clothes. You're like, I don't need any more. I've just posted in the chat a link to a review by somebody who wrote a book called How to Break Up with Fast Fashion. Her name is Lauren Bravo, and she used the app and then wrote a review, and I thought her review was a good starting point if you wanted to use the app. Kat, so my last question to you, which is, as you just mentioned, that you wanted to increase the kind of geographical reach of the app, and the app is very much based on the idea that digitalization is a good solution to reducing our kind of consumer behaviors in fashion. But what would you say about areas of the world or even of this country that don't have access to digital platforms, can't afford digital platforms, can't afford internet? I mean, I know that's not such a huge problem in the UK, but just that solutions, as Mahenaz mentioned at the beginning, we should always be thinking towards like something that's universally possible. So what would you say about places that have like a digital penetration gap?
So I think it's a really pertinent point, and I think that idea of inclusivity and accessibility is something that's really important, because these are global systemic issues that we're talking about. I think Save Your Wardrobe is very much focused and embedded in local ecosystems and local communities. So I think whilst the digital traction and digital penetration might be lacking in some areas, I think it's very much a tool that supports an idea basis around longevity with your clothing items. So I think where there may be gaps in digital provision, I think the ideas behind this about doing more with less still remain. I think their ecosystem of service, I think it ties in nicely with the way we've been living over the past year, which is very much around the growth of the 15-minute community, that we have to be able to engage locally, and we're seeing people really want to engage with places that they can walk to. And I think that's where some of the services such as repair and care of clothes, I would hope that we do almost go back to an era of supporting local and having a relationship with local tailors, local menders, so that you can think about that longevity and durability with your clothing items. So I think Save Your Wardrobe is really a provision that joins up all of those service providers. But I think where there is gaps, those service providers in terms of our locality do by and large still exist, and it's about access and using those and continuing to use those even post-pandemic when we move to new normal, whatever that looks like.
No, that's so true. And I really hope that it takes off, because I think the app was launched during the pandemic. So it's yet to be seen how people react to it once we can have in-person services. But I think it's going to be big, because it's in all of our interests to repair and reuse things. It just makes no sense not to. So thank you so much, Kat, for your answers. So last but not least, Shauntelle, I have some questions for you.
Hello.
Yes, you're not muted. Great.
Yeah.
So my first question also relates to kind of the digital world. So you're using digital platforms to support people, to help people understand, their choices, what choices that they have, what behaviors they're currently indulging in, just help people be more mindful. But from you know, you use Instagram mostly, I think, for your work. Do you think using such digital platforms kind of means that you're talking to the same people again and again? You're preaching to the choir in a way, because, you know, people who like your posts, you know, they share it with people who are of similar mindset. And then how are you expanding it? How are you beating the algorithm to take your message to the wider world?
So yeah, I agree that the following that I have are the people that are already interested. So it's hard to get the message across to people who are not already thinking sustainably. And I have been more aware of the fact that some people just don't care. I think that's what we were all kind of discussing. And it's hard to make people care as well when there are so many, I think, relative hardships. And we were talking about the UK being one of the biggest consumers or participants in fast fashion. Some people don't even think about where the garment comes from or anything like that. So it is hard to get people to then, you know, consider that in their decisions. Yes, I think I would say that the work that I do is preaching to the converted. So it can be difficult, but for me, it's all about having the open discussions in the language and starting small. So I know that we've all talked about having a top-down approach, and there's a lot of us, of course, in here that have a bottom-up approach. But for me, I think my approach is more below bottom. You know, it's kind of self-reflection, and I feel like language is everything. So even if, and it was mentioned that sustainable and eco and things like that are just buzzwords, it's so important those buzzwords are out there in the first place, because I feel like small changes like that are eventually going to manifest into a reality. So even if it is just ourselves, you know, I notice that for birthdays and Christmases and gifts, or even just pages that people come across, they'll say, oh, I found this and this is sustainable, I think you would be interested in it. But that's got them talking about it. And even just places like, you know, we want to support sustainable brands. We want to boycott places like Primark. We refuse to shop there. We don't want to go to H&M, things like that. But then they are slowly starting to incorporate schemes. Even just Primark having pictures up saying that, oh, your cotton is sustainable. It maybe is a bit of propaganda, and for people like ourselves who are a bit more active, it's not so nice to see. It's the bare minimum, but that will, just having that image there, get consumers thinking about, okay, well, why would that even be a thing? You know, why is sustainable? Why is there a sustainable fashion with ASOS? It's still not the best retailer to shop with, but they've got a sustainable option there. They've got a responsible option there. So for me, it's just about kind of like dropping in those buzzwords everywhere, starting the conversation, starting the discussion, even if the discussion is not about being sustainable, as long as the discussion is being had and people are coming to you and recognizing that you're interested in it, I think eventually, yeah, it will manifest into something bigger. So that's kind of hopefully my idea of about spreading it and making it reach further. Anyway, I hope that makes sense.
So we've got one last question for you here before we open up the floor to the audience. And we're just wondering, so in your interactions with followers, what do you think is the biggest problem that young people face today in relation to overconsumption?
I think what a lot of people had touched on as well is that with it being so cheap, I think it's really deep rooted. We've talked about a big complex of issues, and it's not just one thing. Delia, you were saying that it spans into absolutely everything, and it really, really does. And I do think being sustainable does have a big, it's got privilege written all over it. As much as I'm for it, of course, that's why I'm here. It does just have privilege written all over it. And I think that's where we need to break the stigma behind sustainability being only for a select few people. So it's about normalizing it, I believe. We have to understand as well that there's two sides of the argument, and that cheap clothing to people is a way for them to belong, especially if the UK is part of fast fashion and everyone around you is engaging in it, and Boohoo and Pretty Little Thing, and I've always got these sales going on. It's so hard to not be a part of that, especially when you are young, and especially it's part of your identity, being a part of that. Especially Instagram plays such a role in, you know, it's someone's birthday, they need to get a new outfit for an Instagram post, especially when it's COVID and we're all nodding our heads because we've done it. So it's coming across that, breaking that, just making it normal. We've got to understand though that buying cheap things and going to Primark and having access to nice clothes is so important as well for people. So it's about looking at the full argument and not just casting it aside. And that's an important part about what Omar was saying, is it is up to the retailers as well. I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is getting people to think beyond the price and things like that. So I think, yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge. How we're going to overcome it, I think, again, it just comes back to having the conversations and making sure the topic is being discussed, and eventually hoping that it will manifest into something.
Your blogging is working and is important because you made me realize, because I was thinking that like all the clothes I currently have from fast fashion brands are bad, and then you were like, no, if you have clothes that you've been wearing that you wear every single day, or like is your favorite top, or you know, serves a purpose, or that you've kept it for a really long time, then like it's the same as slow fashion. It's the same as buying from a sustainable.
Oh, of course,
place.
of course.
So, like,
and I think, yeah, that the whole thing with like the outfit of the day, just like
yeah,
it's important. Maybe I do it, I know what I'm wearing, but just to point out, by the way, I've had this top for this long, and this is maybe from a fast fashion retailer, but I've had it for this long. It will encourage other people to start thinking about, oh, how long have I had this for? How long have I had this for? And if it's constantly recurring that, oh, I've only had this for a week, a month, it might then start to make them think about, you know, why am I buying so much, and adding value to what they've got. So again, just starting discussions and conversations. I think just do it at any time that you can.
yes, absolutely. Well, we have started a big conversation here.
Yeah.
Lots of dialogue. Thank you so much. Each and every speaker brought brilliant points to the table, points that we can take home, think about, carry on, research. It's really a never-ending conversation, and I'm just, yeah, I'm so glad that all of you could make it, and all of you kind of brought such interesting ideas.